Happy Monday to everyone. Happy August to all of my Leos. We are going to start our series. This is something new for Real Images, and I'm very excited that we're going to start off a 4-part series talking about narcissists and narcissistic abuse. This is something that Kelisa and I feel is a topic that doesn't get talked about enough, but the situations happen more often than we realize. And so just like with anything that we do with Real Images, we're always going to bring a conversation or bring a topic that is not really discussed often. So I felt like that this was an appropriate platform to do this with. And so I'm so happy to have Kelisa Volson to be our collaborator on this work. She is an expert and just so happened to be my cousin. So it all goes hand in hand here. I want to give Kelisa an opportunity to introduce herself as I kind of get this thing going with the iPad and look at who's joining us on Facebook. So Kelisa, let everyone know who you are.
Hello, I'm so excited, first of all, to be here. It's always a pleasure doing stuff with, people that you're connected with on different levels, professionally and personally. So I thank Michelle and Real Images for having me to be a part of this wonderful opportunity. And my name is Kelisa Volson. I am currently trained as a licensed professional counselor. I am currently practicing in the great state of Georgia, and I'm also licensed in Louisiana, and I also do therapy in Florida via online. Also own my own private practice, Rising Heights Counseling Center, where we work with teens mostly, but also adults, in helping them navigate through a lot of mental illness and wellness practices to help them build upon their skills to especially navigate through what's going on during these times. So yes, that is what I do. I also do coaching, motivational speaking, and I also have a podcast that airs on all of the, platforms, Kelshare's podcast. So that's among the small bit of things that I do, but those are the things that I am able to mention. And I just, first of all, love giving information, educating, and inspiring women. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we get started, we want to do some disclaimers, okay? Whenever I do a workshop or something like that, and I'm sharing my experiences and I'm giving advice, I always tell people, now don't go make a life-changing move and say that Michelle told you to do it. That's not what this is. And so I want to give the disclaimer on the front end, and we'll also emphasize this throughout, that it is not our purpose here to make a formal diagnosis of anyone. It is not our intent for you to leave this and go and confront and say that Michelle and Kelisa said that you're a narcissist. That is not the intent. As Kelisa said, this is to give information and to have a conversation and to bring light to a topic that is not shared a lot. Also, I want to say that, disclaimer, Kelisa and I are 10 months apart. We basically grew up together. And so there is, no lie, 30 years of backstory that she and I share. And she may say something that I understand more in depth about. I may say something that she understands more in depth about. So if you hear us kind of like do a little laugh or giggle, it's not about the topic. It's not about you guys. It's because we almost have the same brain and we just know our whole lives. And so I want to make that also disclaimer on the front end. For those who are watching, please create a watch party or share This feed, I've already seen that a couple of people have already shared on their platforms and their timelines already. So we appreciate that. If you have comments or questions throughout this, please feel free. But this particular episode is really just laying down the foundation, and it's a lot of information to try to get into in an hour. But we still want you guys to be engaged in the conversation. Kelisa, do you have any additional disclaimers that you want to put out there for the people?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. This is for educational purposes only. I do suggest, if you feel like that you know somebody or are somebody that has some of those similar characteristics or challenges, please go and get formally diagnosed in your area. I know it's issues with going in person these days, but definitely they do have online resources for those that need and want those services. So yes, that's it. That's it.
Okay. Awesome. And Kelisa and I both have stories to share, but that's not what this particular episode is about. We may get more into that in parts 2 through 4. But again, we want to give a foundation here tonight. I already got my brother-in-law, Mark, watching. He's saying his mom and my babies are watching. So, hey, my babies, always my babies. And hey, Mama Paula. April Jackson has already commented, Kelisa, that she needs that shirt. So we're going to post about shirts on the Real Images, on the Real Images platforms and on the event page. So yes, you can get that shirt. That is a yes. And so we're going to go ahead and start. Kelisa, so, and you kind of hinted this when you shared the event today. A lot of times we use the word narcissist kind of, I don't want to say at random, but we kind of use it more commonly than probably we should. There's kind of a back and forth about what a narcissist is and what narcissism is. So can you first tell us from a clinical level, from a clinician, what is the definition of narcissism and a narcissist?
So definitely there's a distinction, because a lot of times we will throw around the idea of, okay, well, you're a narcissist because you did one particular thing, or it's an isolated situation or incident. So, it's almost kind of like somebody will call somebody bipolar. You know how people usually say, oh, you're bipolar just because you have certain characteristics or it's an isolated incident. So to distinguish a narcissist and just characteristics or flaws of somebody, it has to be where somebody is diagnosed where they have an impairment or it's causing some type of strain or dysfunction in their normal way of living in their daily life. And it are certain specific characteristics to a narcissistic personality disorder that involve a lot of shaming people, wanting to isolate people. They have this false sense of reality and entitlement. I think that's the main thing is entitlement and not wanting to, or not being capable of, in many instances, of having empathy and sympathy for other people outside of themselves and what they want and what their desires and needs are. So the main way to distinguish is the dysfunction and the way that they carry out their life that's causing an increase in, them not being able to do things in what we quote unquote say a normal capacity. So it's causing chaos in their life and other people's lives.
And can you go into a little bit more detail about that lack of empathy and that entitlement that you mentioned was kind of like a significant piece of that? because, and we'll get into this later, like we all have some type of narcissistic trait. Like we have ego, like that's built into us. But what highlights when it comes to that lack of empathy and sense of entitlement? Like what are some examples, I guess?
Yeah, so basically, anybody that feels like, whatever they do, whether it's right or wrong, it comes back to them feeling like it's right, no matter what. It's like they never take accountability for anything that happens. For example, someone may be late, for an event, and it could be you, and then you come to the event, and the narcissistic character will say, well, it's your fault, and it could have been a car accident or something really major, but still it's your fault that you're late, and you're just not, you know you're not responsible enough to be here on time. That type of stuff. No matter what the situation is, it's always going to be your fault. And it could even be because they had a hand in something, they had a hand in causing you to be late, but it's always the other person's fault. It's because they have this false sense of reality and entitlement that I never do anything wrong.
Okay. Um, okay, so Adora is on. She's asked a question. She's asked two questions, so we'll take one at a time. How common is narcissism? Like how often do we probably interact with a narcissist?
Now, to be formally diagnosed is not a big chunk of people that are formally diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. It's almost like a small percentage, like less than 10%, that are diagnosed. Because of that, first of all, they don't take accountability. So if you don't take accountability, you can't go get tested and you can't be diagnosed.
Yeah.
See what I mean? So that's why you have the statistics of is not a lot of people diagnosed, although it may be I'm sure, a huge number that are out here running around in these streets that hasn't been diagnosed because they don't feel like they have a problem. So to answer your question, is a small scientific percentage that's diagnosed. However, is more people out here that are running around not diagnosed because they don't have the concept of having issues or I'm doing anything wrong.
Okay. And then her next question is it generational or more of a result of environment or social conditioning? I think that's a good question.
That's a very good question. Although it's not a whole lot of research on NPD, we call it narcissistic personality disorder. However, there is most parts has to do with the social environment that someone was exposed to early in the developmental stages. Usually you find that people that have narcissistic personality disorder were with parents that were either too, like really, really in tune with them, or almost too, what the word I'm trying to say, just too
kind of like hovering,
modeling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or it was a situation where it was kind of neglectful, or they didn't get those needs met early on. So they try to compensate for that later on in life. And now you have these, pathological and dysfunctional behaviors because they're trying to make up for something that they didn't have or had too much of, early on.
And so and we have Janet Moore Lindstrom that said, great answer. And Kelisa and I have talked about this. We've talked about this topic here recently, and we're just having cousin talk. But when she explained this to me, the way I took it in was, as a child is development and their brain is in development, if a child does not get what they need as far as emotion and logic and things that helps formulate their brain function, as they get older and as that firms up, it relates. So if you had to harden yourself as a child, so to speak, and you had to harden yourself because you weren't getting the love or the attention or the compassion or whatever the case, or the nurturing that you needed, then you become a person who is not empathetic. And that's just me on the layman's term. I ain't got no degrees in psychology, sociology. Well, I got a sociology degree, but
Come
not
on,
in
give
social
yourself
work.
some credit. Come on now.
I got a little
Don't
bit.
act like that.
I got a little bit, but nothing that's individual, like what I've studied is in large groups of people, but not on an individual case. But can you go into, because I think people just don't understand just the functions of our brain development and how emotions come into play with that, and all of that from our as young as being a baby on up until we get into that mid-20 range.
Yeah, so just because, we can be here all day talking about child development and developmental issues, but just, each stage in life, the age ranges from birth to early childhood to teens to throughout the cycle of life. You have certain stages and progress that you're quote unquote supposed to make so you can develop effectively and go on through the next stage in a healthy way. So when we talk about some of these things that happen during early stages, that is pretty much the quintessential part where a lot of the pathology is developed, because like you said, the brain doesn't develop until you're in your early mid-20s fully. And so, if you're having issues with a parent figure or, some type of, you know, trauma or something that happens during those early stages between, I would say, even as early as when you come out the womb, because research has shown that babies that don't get a lot of touch and, comfort from their parents, they have different, ways of adjusting versus those that had those, comforting parts. So, it is very, very crucial that, these stages early on are, went through in a proper way. And I know sometimes things happen and you're not in the, most, positive environments where that is able to happen, but that is crucial for a child's development. And then later on in life, as we become adults, being able to navigate through life's challenges in a healthy way. So, yeah, each stage of life that you go through from a range of ages, especially early on, is crucial in your development, I believe, because there's different theories. We could go through that too. But I believe, working with people for X amount of years, that people have an origin of these issues dealing with, childhood dysfunctions and development.
Okay, awesome. Um, let's see, we have people chiming in. Yeah, Mark, I'm going to get to that too. Mark asks, how does unhealthy narcissist behavior look in the workplace? That is on our list to talk about. Janet Lindstrom, I wonder how many of those with MPD have a disorganized attachment style. I don't know what that means, but that sounds real interesting. And then, hey, V, we're going to get to that too. Is narcissistic disorder treatable? So you guys are asking great questions that we're definitely going to get to.
Awesome questions.
Yeah. And so I don't know what disorganized attachment style is, but can you comment on Janet's question?
Now, from my perspective, quote me if I'm wrong, because I'm not the, all knowing, being knowing here. But to me, it means their ability to have, relationships with people and not carry on some type of dysfunctional, like a codependency. So ask her if that's right or wrong before I answer, because I want to make sure I'm answering the question correctly.
Okay, we'll wait for her to chime in on that. Um, we can kind of go into Mark's questions because that was my second question. So what does a narcissist look like in our everyday lives? So everyday lives being home life, work life, civic groups, romantic relationships. So how does that look in those different areas? And I know that we're going to be into this question for a minute, but let's dig into it.
Ooh, so, it's a spectrum, and everybody's going to be a little different because everybody has different personalities when you talk about, NPD. But overall, you're going to see somebody that talks about themselves all the time, and always building themselves up, and you'll be almost to the point of where, man, they talking about that same story again. Why they still bragging about that over and over and over? We know, we get it, we was here, we saw it. So why do you have to keep bringing it up all the time? Because really, they may put on this facade that they're so awesome, and they have this quote unquote false sense of entitlement because they really don't believe it themselves, but they're putting on these airs like they do in front of an audience. But really, deep down inside, they don't have all of that great self image about themselves or self worth. So it's somebody usually that, wants to do something all the time at work, and, you know, wants to be the center of attention, and they may be this type of person that is kind of clingy and wants to, in relationships, romantic relationships, they may be this type of person that's, you know charming at first. That's how they get you. They don't come off like this in the beginning. They have to grab you and get you reeled in some type of way. So they come off as charming, and they use whatever tools that they know works for you to reel you in. And then once they have you reeled in, they start stonewalling. What we call it is they may ignore your phone calls, but don't you try ignoring theirs. You know what I mean? So it's
And
like,
that's that laughing at 30 years I was telling y'all about.
right, because this is serious stuff, but
Yeah.
we
But
have this.
Lisa can read my mind, so
Right.
continue.
So,
Sorry.
you have this charming person, this person that seems like everybody loves, and, everybody adores, and they come off to that in front of people in the crowd. It's when they get you isolated and, to yourself that all of this comes out, and then it causes you, because they put on such a good front and airs in front of other people, when something happens behind the scenes, it has you questioning, well, am I tripping? What is going on? Am I really seeing? I mean, what is going on? So, and then with the gaslighting, they even make you think something is wrong with you, because they will make up lies and say stories and things to make you believe, even if you saw it happen, they'll make you believe that it wasn't true, that it was still your fault that something happened. So those are some examples, just generalized. And like I said, I could talk about it all day, but just to give you some insight and kind of what to look for in different characteristics, just to keep an eye open for. And the main thing I want to reiterate is that entitlement piece. Like they could at work, we'll go back to work, you could be working in teams. And of course, they want to be the person that leads the team effort. And whatever somebody else is doing, they minimize it. They, make it seem like, oh, your work is not good enough, all these types of things. And they may even stop communicating with you during the project. And then you're wondering, okay, what's going on? We're on a team, type of job here. But they just stop all communication or make you feel like you did something wrong for me to even stop talking to you. So
Wow.
it's deep. It's real deep. So I mean, and a lot of times we don't really pick up on some of those things, but when we know what we're looking for, we'll be better equipped to kind of deal with, certain characteristics and situations.
Right. Wow. Okay. That was a lot. Um, we got DK on here, the Kiwis. He done said, come on, with like 5 different exclamation points. Thank you, DK, for tuning in. Adora's back on. How do you coexist with these people, especially if they aren't or will be diagnosed? That's a great question. Um, Janet Lindstrom did come back. She said attachment styles trace back to what you were discussing about early experiences with a caregiver. A person with disorganized attachment styles demonstrate inconsistent, insecure attachment behaviors. They might be really clingy, but they can also be very emotionally distant. And you just hit on that. So you hit on it before we could even look down and see Janet's comment. So thank you, Janet, for that. Um, Daniel Durbin says, how do you differentiate stonewalling as a trauma response versus a narcissistic behavior? Woo, okay. So Adora, I'm gonna hold your question for our closing. How do you coexist with someone? And that'll actually get into like part 2. I think part 2 and 3 as well. But let's go to Daniel's question. How do you differentiate stonewalling as a trauma response versus narcissistic behavior?
I actually think they kind of coincide because of the origins of the NPD and the pathology. But the thing with stonewalling with narcissists is they're trying to belittle somebody. It's always like a negative impact on the other person, to make them feel less than. I don't believe that traumatic responses have that type of connotation. Traumatic responses are based on how I feel about me most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And with stonewalling and narcissism, it's all about narcissism. I'm sorry, it's all about making the other person feel less than and me up here. So I think that's the difference. Again, that's my opinion at this point, but just from my experience in general too, is trauma is a response to, something that impacts you, and you're trying to deal with your own feelings about it, and it has something to do with how I feel about myself in a bad way. But when a narcissist, you're not thinking about, you know, I'm bad. You're thinking about I'm here and the other person is down here. So I'm gonna make you feel down here, and I'm not going to, you know, it's all about making other people feel less than. That's the thing. Even though I may feel insecure about myself,
Right.
but
And
yeah,
I
so that's the difference, I think.
okay. And I was listening to a podcast this weekend, and it talked about trauma and like the definition of trauma. It's almost like using the term bipolar and narcissist, like we kind of overuse the word trauma, and how that person explained it was, like you said, trauma is something that's happened to me and I'm learning how to deal with it. And an example was I may have been in a house fire. And so now when I smell smoke, it takes me back to that point in time of that trauma. Um, versus me having an overly strict parent. Now like I'm an overly strict person. Like that's the way that person described it. Like that's a stressor. It's a different type of event in life. I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit, because I can see how it's hand in hand. Like we talk about, the pathology and what's happening in childhood, and is that by definition of trauma? So is trauma directly related to narcissistic disorder?
Yeah, and I do believe the pathology has some roots in them being traumatized in some type of, developmental stage. However, I think the response, you know, is more so you develop this, it's almost like a defense mechanism. And I know in different areas of life and coping with different things, you develop certain defense mechanisms as well. But it still goes back to when you're talking about narcissism and NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, about the entitlement. And it's not like they're a lot of times even in tune to that part of the trauma and even wanting to, admit to it, even though they may realize it's there somewhere deep down inside, but their main motive is to use this person, or what we call a supply, and get them to the point where I can keep using them. Mm-hmm. Have them at my fingertips, have them at will for me. So if I stonewall them, what happens? If I ignore a call, or you don't know I'm ignoring your call, and then you talk to me 24 hours later, and I say, oh, no big deal. So during that time between the 24 hours that you're trying to call or connect with that person and they don't answer, what are you doing most likely? Oh, and they've been answering your calls now. It's not like they just, this is a frequency that's consistent. You've been chasing me, doing all these great things, and all of a sudden, okay, you're not answering my calls when you usually texting me back or letting me know something, but now you're just not going to even respond. So then what are you doing? I'm calling, I'm texting, I think something's wrong, I'm leaving voice messages, and then you call back when you decide it's convenient for you. This is stonewalling. Mm-hmm. I was busy, no big deal. Not giving an explanation, not showing any type of empathy, anything like that. So I think when it comes to that distinguishes the trauma response from a narcissistic response, because I'm just trying to keep you at a leash with my, my charm, and, because I've gotten to a point where, you're somebody that I can benefit from to upbuild myself. Mm-hmm. That's what that's about. It's not about, okay, I'm traumatized and I feel bad about myself, or I went through this in a certain part of development in my life, and I'm trying to go through the emotions and figure out how to deal with them. It's a fine line between that, I believe. So
it's almost like hearing you talk about it. It's using the person so you can either feel good or look good. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Adora says, not that I'm diagnosing anyone. This is about to be good. Adora. But it seems like in the midst of conflict, the narcissist person would deflect to avoid accountability and therefore place the blame and redirect the conversation to others. Yes, I can tell you that.
Yes, ma'am. Or, let me add this, or they will get very explosive and hostile. And again, it makes you feel like, well, you question yourself, like, well, what is going on? Because they're getting so upset about being, one thing about it, they do not like being embarrassed. It's all about my, and I'm sorry, it's all about my reputation and how I look in front of people a lot of times. So if I'm in front of people and, I feel like I'm being threatened, or I feel like I'm going to be embarrassed or called out on something, you best believe they're going to pull out all the stops to make you feel even less than they feel at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yes, and the reason why, and I know we're not sharing business in this one, but I had experience, not that I'm diagnosing anyone, but I've had experience where you ask a question, like something is putting, like you said, it's putting right in front of your face. You ask a question to get clarity or challenge it, and then all of a sudden, like you said, it gets very explosive, and that person is attacked. Me asking a question, me trying to get clarity on something, is an attack. And like you said, Kelisa, is like, okay, but what did I say? You start feeling like, well, what did I do to you? You know, and then maybe after a day, I'm sorry, work it out, talk through it, and it goes back into this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm learning too. I'm learning too. I do, as we're going into this, because I think Daniel kind of got us there, but it kind of goes into our next question. And you emphasize this, but I want people to really get it and understand. How do we separate that notion of having narcissistic traits versus having clear actions of being someone that who could possibly be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder? So what's the difference between me wanting to brag about my accomplishments or celebrate, let's say celebrate accomplishment of mine, or just having an ego or things like that, versus going on the other end of things?
And again, I don't know, I may have mentioned this earlier, it's more so about the consistent dysfunctions of it. Because we all have, like you said, ego, and we want to, let people know we have done something great or we've accomplished some goal that we've been working on, sure. But again, like I said earlier, where it's all the time, somebody was repeating over and over about something that they did or something they did for somebody else, or always feel like they have to be the center of attention and all these things, is causing some dysfunction here, because that's really not necessary. But to them it is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the separation of, if it causes some type of dysfunction in everyday life. And definitely that could cause dysfunction in your work, your relationships, always bringing up your own things and having a false sense of entitlement, not ever wanting to be accountable for everything. Now, nothing. They're never accountable. Now, if it's a regular person, you're going to take some responsibility for something.
Right.
But if you're a diagnosable candidate, you are not going to accept responsibility before anything. It's all or nothing. You're always going to feel like, I'm right and they're wrong. It's like me against them. So I think that's the difference, where, you have certain isolated instances. It's kind of like when people say I'm depressed. And I talk to people about, okay, certain situations, and then we go into the details of, okay, well, how long you been depressed, and have you felt depressed before? But it's situational depression, and then it's chronic depression.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's just an instance where I'm depressed, okay, when that instance or something happens and that goes away, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to feel depressed anymore. But if it's chronic depression, you're going to consistently feel depressed. So it's kind of like narcissistic personality disorder. You're consistently being, entitled to something or someone. You're consistently belittling people. You're consistently shaming people. And you're consistently not taking accountability for your actions.
Right. Okay. Do narcissists worry about being narcissistic?
No, because they don't even identify that that's part of their psyche.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even, that's why you have the low numbers of diagnosis, because they don't get help. They don't feel like they need it. What am I need help for? It's everybody else's fault.
Mm. Okay. One thing, because you know, a lot of people, they're using the word narcissist a lot from what we see on memes now, you know, and what we see on the internet. And one thing I saw is that not necessarily all pathological liars are narcissists, but all narcissists are pathological liars. I thought that kind of caught my attention. Um, and people talk about like borderline personality disorder and things like that, which is totally different. You talked about having this sense of entitlement and this almost like grandiose type of behavior. But what about that pathological lying part? Is that a part of it, or is that something that's a totally different diagnosis in a totally different situation?
It's definitely part of it. It's definitely part of, trying to manipulate and get people sucked into you where they feel like, you know, they can't be without you, or they can't, disassociate from you, because I still want to keep them at arm's length, or keep them, you know, hooked on my string so I can use them the way and manipulate them the way I need to. So definitely pathological lying is a big component to NPD. However, there are two subtypes, and they recently even broke it down to four, but I still think, just for this situation, we can talk about just the two. We divided into vulnerable narcissistic personality disorder or grandiose. And grandiose is the one where you have a lot of the, characteristics of, I don't care about your feelings, it's all about me, even though they still have the same, premises together, but it's kind of, separated into, okay, you have those that are totally on this side of the scale versus those that are more emotional. And those, I think, are the ones that are hardest to kind of tell, because they put off as they care about, feelings and things like that, because you'll see them crying, or, having, these types of false emotions that they put out, but really still is not genuine, because they're not really able to show those emotions authentically. So that is another, way to kind of be like, okay, well, now I see the grandiose. That's easy to see. But those that are vulnerable narcissists, they play on more emotions. They give off a lot of what it seems to be emotion to get you reeled in and, keep you at arm's length, like I said.
Wow. And how is that different from the terms that we hear when we hear covert and overt and malignant? Like, is that similar, or is it totally different as well?
It's still within those subtypes. Covert is more of a like, I believe it's more of like with the, what they call is pro-social, and then you got the anti-social. So the pro-social is more of like the, the ones that show more emotions and things like that. The anti-social is more like the grandiosity, the ones that don't show, a whole lot of emotions after they've gotten you hooked in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Um, Dang, people they really taking notes, because I don't see any questions coming in, but someone did say they're taking notes on what we're talking about here. Well, we have like 15 minutes, and so I do want us to get into the last question, and this is something that has been asked from a couple of people here on the feed. What are the support systems for those? And I want to say, what are the support system for those who have been diagnosed? But looking at some of the conversations here, what are support systems for those who want to get diagnosed or feel that they should get diagnosed, and what does that look like? And then after diagnosis, then what is the next step?
Very interesting that you brought up those that may feel like they have those characteristics, the NPD or narcissistic personality disorder. How do they get help? Truly and sadly, is not a lot for them. What I have seen is more for survivors.
Yeah.
So, you know, because again, it's not a whole lot of those that are deemed or have characteristics coming out and saying, I have this issue.
Right.
Or, able to, put into words or say, okay, I need help. Because 9 times out of 10, they're like, hey, it's everybody else. I don't have a problem. So it's not a lot of resources. The only really resources that I have seen was like a Reddit forum, and it had like 8,000 people. And that's like the only one that I could even fathom for those that have, you know, that type of characteristic, which is sad because I feel like they really need the education, the help, so they can recognize. But again, if you don't acknowledge you have a problem, we can't help you.
Right.
And for those that are survivors and those that have gone through certain relationships and issues with that type of personality, there are a plethora of support groups. I do recommend counseling and therapy for, dealing with that trauma because it is traumatic. And I think as we go along, we'll talk about, I think in the next one, about self-esteem and narcissism. But there are a lot of people that have dealt with, narcissists in some form of relationship, whether it be work, romantic, or whatever, develop what they call egoism. And, and we'll get into that next time, but is, having this, after effects after you've been involved with somebody on whatever level that has those, characteristics or diagnoses. So they do have some support groups for that. They also have, you can Google online. Facebook, I think, has a few narcissistic survivors, or they call it victims. I don't like to say victim, you're a survivor.
Right, right.
But they do say victim on some of the, group titles. So, and me and Michelle talked a little bit about having one because we feel like it's necessary to continue resources after we do the series. So we'll talk more about that as well. But I think it's necessary to just have a place where people feel validated and feel comfortable being able to share about their experiences and get some healing from, those type of situations. So again, you can Google, you can, look on Facebook. There are, therapists and counselors that work specifically with survivors, and you can just look up those people in your area that specialize in certain, specialties and areas of, wellness.
Okay. Awesome. Let me see here. Okay. So I had a question and then it left me. I'm sorry, guys. I was looking down to see if anybody else had a question. So in our next session, we're going to talk about how we end up falling for a narcissist. And so I think we can use the last few minutes to kind of do a precursor into that and then get more into that, into part 2 next Monday. But you mentioned with some type of narcissist getting you hooked, like saying what needs to be said to get you in. And then once you're in, then the cycle starts. Give us some examples with, and it can be again with the same kind of subset: home life, work life, civic group, relationships. Like, what are some of those examples that we need to have an active ear for when a narcissist is trying to make us their supply? And I do I think we have enough time for you to define supply as well, but let's start with what we need to listen for first.
Okay, and if you hear my son in the background, don't mind him, okay?
Hey, Trey.
He doesn't want to go to bed. So when we talk about, you know, supply, I guess I want to go on with supply first.
You can, go ahead.
When we talk about supply, you think in terms of, okay, when you have a supply of something, you have enough quantity at will, right?
Mm-hmm.
You keep it in, you know, bulk, or you keep it where you don't run out. So when it comes to having this type of personality, using people as a supply, of course, they have multiple. It's not, don't think it's just you. Don't think you special now. What? I'm
Right.
just kidding. You are special, but
You
not
are special, but it's not just you.
So, you know, they're always trying to recruit people so they can use them at will for whatever they need at that moment. Mm-hmm. So what happens is they draw you in, they you know, they play on and they watch you. They get to know what you like, what you dislike, and they do everything they can to satisfy that need and what's lacking to make you feel special. Okay?
Right.
They're courting you, you know, of course. And so once they get you, you know, where they need you to be, of course, when you get into a situation where you're invested, it's difficult to leave because you're invested. And so when we talk about supply, you know, even if you, like you gave the example about if you have the proof or whatever in front of you, they will deny it, and then they'll go and do something to try to appease the situation to make you, you know, forgive them, forget about that, and go on and keep doing the same thing because they feel like, oh, I got that supply where I need them. It's tailored to whoever is almost on the brink of, you know, decreasing my supply that they pay the most attention to. So the people that's coming in, they're going to spend the most time with them to get them vested. And so, you know, once you're vested, oh, well, I need to go recruit somebody else because, you know, maybe eventually they're going to get tired, or, you know, I'm going to use them, you know, in the way that, you know, I want to, and I get bored. I'll just go and get somebody fresh and new, you know, with some other skills, some other, you know, ideas, some other talents, some other resources, you know. So that's how it kind of works. It's like they're baiting you, they're wooing you, you know, they make you feel like you're the only person in the world, you're the greatest, and you are, but to somebody that's easily persuaded, you know, it holds more weight than somebody that's healthy in their self-esteem and self-confidence. Because if you are, you can tell, oh, he is just full of it, or she's full of it, you know, just overly doing things. So you just have to watch out for that, and just make sure, you know, time will tell, because they can't keep up the facade for long. Time will tell. So just give yourself time to see, you know, what happens, and don't, you know, be too hasty about making a judgment, you know, immediately, but just let it play out, because I guarantee that he or she is going to reveal their true self to you.
And it's almost like life is a game, because that, I mean, it's like recruit, settle, give, you know, stonewall them, recruit, get them in, stonewall them, recruit. It's like this, it's this perpetual game that's being played. That's life, you know. With my experience, I've had close friends say, well, didn't that person get tired? Like, that's a lot of time invested in the day to do all of this. And and for us, for rational to in the rational terms, it is a lot of time. Like, who has that amount of time? But it seemed like for someone who could be, I like how you said, a candidate for, to be tested as a narcissist, as a candidate, like that is life. Life is the game. Am I hitting on that pretty
Right.
good? Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, yeah, Adora said that's just it. They don't seem to get that this is life and it's not a game of chess. Yes, definitely, definitely. Um, okay, I feel like we did what we came to do for this one. So Edwin would come in right the last few minutes. So my brother Edwin says, if you see a friend in a relationship with someone with MPD, what can you say or do for your friend to help shine a light on that behavior for them? So again, if you see a friend in a relationship with someone with MPD, what can you say or do for your friend to help shine a light on that behavior for them?
Well, first of all, it's really touchy when you talk about getting involved in, telling people what to do about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
However, you can always just bring up the facts. Leave your emotions out of it. Bring up the facts of what you see with, and how you say it is very important. You want to say it with, empathy and thought and just, with love.
Mm-hmm.
And it just takes that person to be able to look at the facts once they remove the emotion away from what's going on. Because, of course, you're invested emotionally and your mind is all frazzled because they got you in this whirlwind of lies and manipulation until you start questioning even you know, your own validity of what's going on. So it's just going to take your support and just giving them back the facts of what's going on and just, helping them along through with it because it's just going to be, a battle with you trying to interject because of course if they're in a relationship with somebody with NPD, that that person is going to try to isolate them even more and they're going to feel, you know, they're going to feel like, oh, well, they're just trying to break up our relationship. You don't need to be around them anymore. They're trying to come between us. Don't let anybody, so once somebody is invested like that, and you can tell how far somebody's invested with somebody. Um, but I can say just give them the facts and be supportive and just be there for them through the process. And eventually, hopefully, they will see. And the thing is, once they are able to get away from that person, help them gain the confidence and the strength to stay away. Because I think that's the issue is sometimes you can get away temporarily, but you can't maintain it.
Right, right. And and let's see, Adora said, just don't tell them I told you so when it crumbles because most folks ain't leaving until they get tired. There you go.
True.
And I would say, just for me personally, um, the isolation comes in different forms. So you can isolate yourself because you're ashamed that you keep being put in a situation over and over again. And you feel like you know better and you're giving up parts of yourself and you're in this other life, um and what will people say, you know and so that's also like a hard piece too when you're um trying to coach your friend out of this, because there's a lot of emotional personal turmoil that you don't necessarily know about that that person is struggling with that they have to work out too. But I think, yeah, I mean, just being there and keeping the person strong. I personally think, and we can wrap up on this, for me, breaking out of that and being able to put it out there and shine a light on it definitely helps, because then you have your network, you have your support systems keeping you accountable. And so the toughest piece is breaking out and shining the light. But once you do that as a friend, that's when the friends swarm in and hold that person up. Like Adora says, don't say I told you so. Don't go into, well, I told you this person was a dog, or I told you that you should have left that job a long time ago, or I told you that that particular group wasn't no good. Like, that's not the piece. The piece is to come in and get that person in love and support and say, okay, we're good. We got you. If you ever need anything, call me. And you're going to be okay, and you're going to get through it. So that's my other half of that coin from a non-clinical side. Okay. Well, we're at time.
I felt like this just breezed by, because
I know. And I think we did good kind of keeping it professional, because y'all, we can cut up when we want to. And we may cut up in the next parts, but we definitely wanted to, Kelisa and I both, we were kind of sharing the same brain on this. We definitely wanted to lay down definitions, foundations, things for you guys to think about this week, going into next week when we start to dig a little bit deeper, share some experiences, and really get down to the nitty gritty of this thing called narcissistic and narcissistic abuse. So next week, again, we're going to get into falling for a narcissist and really, really get deep into how do you get entangled and how those cycles start to happen for you. And for you not to judge yourself for getting in the cycle. Like, if anybody can get into this cycle. Because when someone is, as Kelisa said, charming you and wooing you, you're already at a disadvantage because you're not playing life as a game. That, I think that's the thing. Like, we're in our lives trying to be what we want to do. Life isn't a game for us. So you're already at a disadvantage coming in. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Kelisa, in the meantime, please tell people how they can follow you and connect with you between now and next week if they need to.
Yeah, so I'm on social medias. I am here on Facebook on Rising Heights Counseling Center. I also am on Instagram, Rising Heights Counseling, Twitter, all of the, major social medias. And also, I have the podcast, the Kill Shares podcast, on all the major, podcast hosting platforms as well. I do talk about some, other issues on, the podcast as far as personal and professional. So check that out. You'll get some good jewels there. And also the website, risingheightscounseling.com.
Thank you. And yeah, we will watch for the Real Images platform tomorrow. You can follow the event page, Invisible Wounds, so you can keep tabs of us on the event page throughout this month, and also Real Images AR. And we will, April, I haven't forgotten about you. We will share with you how you can get one of those shirts that Kelisa has on, or others that she has. And then I'll also link up with the Real Images Power Shirts. So either way it go, if you want to wear an Adora, send me, and I still haven't read your message, Adora, but Adora wore her power shirt today, even working from home today, and it made her feel some type of way. So whatever we can do to share some positivity and make you guys feel powerful and confident and beautiful and phenomenal, that's exactly what we want to do. So Kelisa, thank you. We will definitely see you again next Monday. Thank you for all of your wisdom. I have learned a lot, and I know everyone else learned a lot in this hour. And we will see you guys next week. Thank you guys so much.